of Natural Resources Department in the Warner College. And yeah, thanks for joining the info session here today to learn a little bit more about the course. It's a course and a place that brings me tons of enjoyment and fulfillment. So I'm looking forward to telling you a bit more about it.
Perfect. And let's go around the room and just do quick little introductions. If you can share your name, your major, and what interests you about this course. I'll get us started. I'm just going to kind of popcorn around based on who I see in the meeting. So Claire, I'll start with you.
Would it be helpful if I stop sharing? Will that help? Because I know you're limited on what you can see.
Yeah, it's a great idea, actually. Yeah, let's see if.
All right.
And if you can't turn your camera on, that's okay. But if you can, that'd be much appreciated just to say at least hello. Claire, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm Claire. I'm an HDNR major, and this course really interests me because I really would like to see how the practices and theories I've been learning about in my courses are applied in the actual field.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. All right, Olivia.
Hello. I don't know if you can see me. There we go. Hi, my name is Olivia. I'm an ESS major, and what really interested me about this is I'm a second bachelor's, and my background's actually in sociology, and I'm really interested in seeing actual field work and being able to combine those two majors. So
thank you, Olivia. Sociologist over here as well. Holly.
My daughter is interested in going on this trip, so she invited me to join to learn more about it.
Love it. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Jennifer.
Hey, I'm a natural resource tourism major, and I have done some research on campus, and so I would be interested in field research in Africa.
Wonderful. And Diana?
Hi, I'm also a parent and interested in learning about this.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. And Sophia.
I'm an HGNR major, and I definitely have some sociology related interests, and I think this would be a really helpful experience to kind of focus where my interests are.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all. So Brett, thinking about kind of just doing some introduction, kind of going through your slide deck, and then we'll kind of do some, again, questions maybe about application next steps and costs and things like that. Anybody feel free to, if you have a question, just you can throw it in the chat or just pop it out. No element of formality here. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Brett. You're muted, Brett. Up there.
Yep.
Yep.
Of course. What would a virtual call be without somebody talking while muted? Dirk, just let me know if there's something wrong with the visual. It looks okay. I've got a dual screen thing going on and hit some settings somewhere along the way, but that
is all good.
And then will you just
look at the chat if we get questions?
Yeah, keep an eye on the chat. Let me know if there's some questions since I can't see it while I'm in presenter view. All right. Well, what I want to cover is what is the course about, and then where are we actually going? Where does this course actually go in Kenya? And then some of the practicalities and logistics of where do we sleep, what do we eat, what does a day kind of look like for the group there. So I will get going on kind of the course, kind of what this course is about. So I'm not just going to read from the text, but whoops. I think I've got a timer on here. The course, it's a methods course. How do we collect data and how does that data get used to make decisions? Sorry, that might keep happening. So that includes social data as well as ecological data. That's going to get old. So in addition to, try to hear if I can fix that. Hang on just a sec. All right. Nope. All right, this might keep up. I might just do this. Dirk, can you see that okay?
That would work, yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, yeah, that's my fault. I could go in and fix all that, but It's a methods course on how do we collect data. So that includes ecological data, data around kind of rangeland health, wildlife populations, as well as the social data. So how do we measure, how do we collect data and measure how people, what they think, how they feel, and what they do behaviorally as it relates to conservation. And then because of the site, where we're going in its history, there's also a great opportunity to kind of talk about what are the most culturally appropriate and ethical approaches to doing that kind of work as people coming from the outside to these communities to do research where conservation has a bit of a mixed history. And so it's a great opportunity to kind of dig deep into those topics, given what the site is. So some of that content, vegetation sampling. So how do we measure and estimate plant and forb or grass cover and biodiversity? How do we measure tree and shrub diversity and frequency? Wildlife monitoring, it's a little bit trickier, right? Because wildlife are on the move. So we learn about what some of those protocols are on how wildlife are monitored. We're a little bit limited on how much actual wildlife monitoring we can do within that time period that we have. Wildlife monitoring, occurs over long periods of time, whereas vegetation and obviously plants and trees don't move, so they're a little bit easier to measure because you can find them. And then, as I mentioned, on the social science side, how do we measure what people think, how they feel, or what their attitudes are towards maybe a specific species? And then behaviorally, kind of what do they do? And again, talking about the cross-cultural context, given the significant power differentials that can exist by outside researchers in settings like this, how can we go about doing that work both ethically as well as in ways that reduce some of those power differentials? So it's not just sort of the highly educated researchers coming in from countries that are associated, with reasonable amounts of wealth and kind of getting what they need and then leaving. That's kind of been that's an older school model with how research has often been done, is kind of what sometimes is referred to as parachute science. You sort of swoop in, get the data you need, you leave, and people never hear from you again, and you go off and analyze your data and publish in papers and things like that. So what are methods that we can use that actually elevate and build capacity with the input of local people? And then inevitably, but when in talking about all those topics, we get into kind of the history of conservation and colonialism in Kenya. Those two things occurred side by side for many decades. So we need to be mindful of how conservation is practiced in Kenya, of that history. All right, a little bit of just kind of orientation to Kenya, just to kind of give us some contextual understanding. And then in the numbers in parentheses that follow the stats are what those numbers are in the US, just to kind of give us some context, because otherwise it's sometimes hard to interpret what some of these numbers mean. So some that I'll kind of highlight here is that life expectancy at birth in Kenya is about 67 years compared to 78 years here. Infant mortality, about 28 occurrences per 1,000 births compared to 6.4 on average. Women have 3.5 kids compared to 2.1 in the US. Median household income, $874 a year compared to 74,000 in the US. So that's probably one of the more striking numbers on this slide. Is that's not a big amount of money, obviously. On the upside, from a literacy standpoint, Kenya is among the highest in sub-Saharan Africa at 82%. And then from a religion standpoint, because religion is a pretty strong influence in the country, it's 82% Christian, 11% Muslim, and then a handful of other belief systems. So it's, Kenya is one of, I guess, what I would describe as kind of an emerging economy. In kind of older terminology, you might use the word a developing world setting. So there's been a significant amount of it. Like these numbers that you see in front of you are so dramatically better than they were 20 years ago, which is about the time that I started doing work there. So there's been a lot of upward mobility and wealth generation in Kenya. There's obviously a long ways to go as well, but it is one of these economies in the world that has seen vast improvements. That household income median used to be under $400 about 20 years ago. So having doubled that, within one generation is pretty significant. Our locations. So here's a map of Kenya. We basically got three places that are sort of our bases at different times during the trip. We fly into and out of Nairobi down there in the southern, kind of south central part of the country, but we really don't spend much time in Nairobi. Literally, most previous itineraries to sort of arrive on day one, you get to where we're staying kind of in a fairly jet lagged, exhausted sort of state of mind, and then we hit the road the next day and leave Nairobi. And a little bit of reversing on that on the way back. We sort of spend one last day in Nairobi just because that's where the international airport is. So not a lot of time in Nairobi beyond arriving and departing from there. Beyond that, we've got two regions we go to. Laikipia, they're in the middle of the country, and Samburu to the northeast of that. These are, although on the map they look pretty close together, and there's probably only about 120, 150 miles or so between the two places. They're vastly different. Laikipia is more of a temperate or mild climate, very, very comparable to a Colorado summer, so kind of warm days and cool nights. It's also one of the more highly educated and developed regions within the country, and in part that has to do with the colonial era or colonial legacy, and where it was colonized by the British. So where different pockets of British populations decided to base. And so it's the home of the initial conservation efforts in Kenya. And as a result of that, it's kind of got a mixed history, both, and mixed present day conservation because of that history. To the northeast of that, we've got the Samburu region, much hotter, much drier, and a much more rugged landscape. And I'll have pictures of this shortly. Livelihood is primarily pastoralism, meaning people raising livestock, mostly cows, goats, and sheep, some donkeys and camels in there as well. It has abundant wildlife populations, and pastoralists are sharing the same landscape with wildlife that they are bringing their animals into. So lots of opportunities or potential for human-wildlife conflict, meaning like lions, hyenas, leopards, maybe predating on a goat or sheep. And a whole bunch of different models of how protected area and conservation is practiced in that region. So it's socioeconomically, they're two very different places. But from a conservation standpoint, they kind of deal with a lot of the same conservation ups and downs. This is just a map from Africa Wildlife Foundation. So again, here's the boundary of Kenya and that kind of shaded grayish shape. And the two yellow circles are these same areas I just highlighted. So Laikipia is here and Samburu's here. And all these other little shadings are some layer of protected area. So you have these dark green pockets that are national parks. You've got the kind of medium green, which is a national reserve. And then you've got this kind of grayish green, which are conservancies. You don't need to obviously know what those are beyond just recognizing that in this region, there's a lot of different approaches to how land is managed for both to achieve both wildlife conservation and livelihood related to pastoralism outcomes. And so when you look at these two areas, the learning opportunities are just tremendous because we've got all great diversity in this region on how conservation and how landscapes are managed, just by looking at the different kind of shades of green and gray that are going on there. So kind of give you some pictures of Laikipia. There's Mount Kenya off there in the background. There's a pretty thriving ranching industry in this part, in part because Laikipia gets good precipitation compared to other parts of the country. Also some rhino populations. You see that on the right there. Just kind of in general, just kind of taking a look to see that this looks kind of like a fairly healthy and lush landscape. And then the main town is Nanyuki. And this is a picture of Nanyuki, and you kind of get a sense for like, okay, there's some kind of developed economy, small business, types of things going on here in Nanyuki. And so we don't stay in the town of Nanyuki. I'll get to this in a bit, but we use Nanyuki as a bit of a base for when we need stuff, because you can get a lot of stuff in Laikipia that is harder to get in other parts of the country. So it has, banks and ATMs and supermarkets and all that kind of stuff. When we're in Laikipia, we stay, our plan is to stay at a protected area called Old Pejeta Conservancy. And there's some pictures there. It's sort of, let's call it dorm style or almost kind of hostel style accommodations. It's not a youth hostel, but it kind of the accommodations remind me of what you might see at a youth hostel. So, basic but decent. That first five, this is basically the first 5 days of the trip once we arrive in Kenya. And we spend a lot of time just doing class content delivery here, meaning there's a lot of learning that goes on during this segment before we apply that learning later on. So we practice implementing the different methods that you learn about. And then, of course, we're in an area that has wildlife, so we'll do some wildlife viewing. And then every night, nearly every night on this trip, we have some kind of group discussion and reflection, and sometimes that's tied to a specific learning outcome. But at a minimum, we're doing reflections like, how did the day go? Because there's lots of experiences and lots of ways to reflect and make meaning out of those experiences within a group. So we spend time doing that almost every night. Just some pictures of what we're doing in those first days. On the left, that's just a quadrat. It's one method for how you measure and estimate vegetation cover in a landscape. On the right, we're doing a little it's a little bit of lecture style, but we just happen to be outside. So this all kind of goes on in Laikipia, this mix of some of the traditional ways that we teach, and then followed by some application just within kind of the boundaries of our group on applying that stuff before we actually go apply it in communities. And after those 5 days in Laikipia and all that content learning, we head up to Samburu. And Samburu is a much different landscape. It's much different socioeconomics. We're kind of getting closer to, in this region, I would say even closer to high levels of poverty for sure. Not quite the desperate levels of poverty, of kind of, the a dollar a day is sort of often a threshold that is sort of used, or a metric that's used to kind of understand an area's level of poverty. And Samburu, kind of the median income up there is just beyond that dollar a day. So high levels of poverty compared to Laikipia, the region that we just looked at before. So just to kind of give you an idea, the town we stay in is called Archer's Post, and I blew up this part of that previous map because it is right at the gateway of 2 national reserves, these 2 kind of lighter green, and then a community conservancy to the north that you see labeled as Kalama, and one other national reserve that's off the page on the right. So it's again, another great place to study conservation because of the amount of conservation that's going on right all around us. So we do 8 nights in Samburu, and you get an idea of the accommodations there. There's actually a bit of a range, and on this past trip, I want to say fortunate, because I guess the students would probably say we're fortunate in that they have these types of tents, tent camping, with some beds and mattresses and all that, and then sort of a central toilet and shower area like you see on the bottom right. But on this past trip, they actually were able to accommodate us in some kind of more basic dorm room style, and some of which had had their own showers and toilets. I think there were 3 people per room. So that just kind of worked out that way on the day that we showed up. They're like, why don't you stay there instead? So we plan on these accommodations that you see here, since that's kind of in part based on the price that we charge, but it's also based in part on the capacity of those other rooms. So what we do in Samburu is we apply all the content that we learned in Laikipia. So we're going out into the rangelands areas and estimating vegetation cover. We are going on drives to kind of understand how our wildlife populations monitored. And then we're also meeting with people in the community, both to get their perspective on how conservation research has been implemented there. But we also have just like a lot of willing partners. So when it comes to kind of practicing methods for social science, they are willing participants in that. So you can actually have either surveys or a focus group type of setting to say, hey, we have a project here to kind of understand how local communities feel towards hyenas. Would you be willing to share your thoughts and perspectives on that? And then, so I've got a 20-year history of working there. And so we've got lots of relationships in place where we can make those types of things happen. Just kind of some great pictures of wildlife and landscapes in Samburu. Samburu is a pretty typical region on many safari itineraries. So there's that safari tourism presence in the region. And as I mentioned, it's predominantly the predominant livelihood is pastoralism. And so people sharing a landscape with all that wildlife with their cows and goats and sheep as well. This is sort of the main part of town, so definitely more kind of rugged and kind of frontier feeling compared to, for example, Nanyuki. We're more limited in what we can get in Archer's Post. So we do lots of good planning to make sure we're coming with most of what we need. We can get plenty of food and all that in Archer's Post, but as far as I just sort of think of the things that sometimes students come up with, of like, I need contact lens solution. Like, we're not going to get that on Archer's Post, but we can get that in Nanyuki. But it just kind of gives you an idea of sort of more of the rugged feel to this part of the country. This is traditional housing by the Samburu tribe. So those are huts made with kind of, branches, sticks, mud, and then those roofs are often some combination of like cardboard. If someone has the means, they'll sometimes buy a tarp and put that over the top. But as as the pictures kind of convey, we're talking about higher levels of poverty than Laikipia. And then, with that poverty comes issues around housing security, food security, and things like that. And we'll have plenty of exposure to that, but in ways that are appropriate for having that exposure. I mean, we've got a lot of relationships in place, and so we're not just kind of doing some sort of poverty tourism, which is kind of a thing in some places. One of those main partners is Unity Women's Village. This is the group of some of those women. It's a village of about 25 women who have all left or all have their story that led them to live only with other women, and how they are more resilient and more empowered by sort of a cooperative approach to living than they would be alone. It's a region of Kenya with a long history of marginalization based on gender. And so women have, had to really practice resilience and perseverance to make progress on having some of the same rights and opportunities that men do. And that progress is being made, but certainly a long ways to go on that as well. After Samburu, we go back up to Laikipia, and we just do 2 nights, and that is mostly to kind of wrap up those research projects that students have worked on in Samburu. So we are at a place there called the Rift Valley Adventure Camp. It kind of is a sort of 2 days of, I'm trying to think of how to best describe this. We're there intentionally and in a fairly remote area, but with high levels of amenities so that students can focus on getting their projects done, not have to kind of be in cross-cultural mode while working on it. So we kind of just create a little bit of a bubble for ourselves for those 2 days so that we can kind of bring closure to the trip and have kind of good productive sessions on finishing up projects. And then because of the location, there's also some outdoor outdoor recreation opportunities there that the staff at Rift Valley Adventures lead for us. And so you can see there's a canopy walk that we're doing in a nearby forest there. And there's some other options, like kind of passive sort of mountain, but there's a mountain biking as an option, not sort of crazy rugged mountain biking, but kind of jumping on bikes to go explore the area. And again, all of this is led by the RVA staff. It's kind of an example day. We usually are kind of completed with breakfast by 7:30, and then everyone kind of runs back to their rooms or their tents to take care of loose ends, and we're ready to go by 8 a.m. Oftentimes that means getting into vehicles. I think in an earlier slide I forgot to point out the Land Cruisers. We rent two four-wheel drive Land Cruisers for the entirety of the trip that come with drivers. And so they are with us the entire time. So we're ready to go by 8 o'clock, do kind of, various course activities until lunch, have some lunch, a little bit of downtime usually after that of maybe 1 to 2 hours. In the late afternoon, there's some kind of version of learning going on, but it really varies on what that looks like depending on the day. Some dinner and reflection, and we're wrapped up, and most people are ready for bed. I mean, they are ready to go to sleep by 9 or 10 p.m. Even if that's much earlier than your typical life, I promise you, it's really easy to go to bed early in these regions and on this trip. Not because we're trying to wear you out. It's just, it's near the equator, so it's like sun comes up at 6, goes down at 6. It gets dark, or your body kind of starts telling you to go to bed anyway. But that's a typical day. Just a couple of reality checks. There's limited internet or limited connectivity for cell phones for a lot of the time, not all of the time, but a lot of the time. So just being mindful that your capacity to sort of stay connected back home is probably not every day, but many days, yes. There's, exposure to extreme poverty, stories of gender marginalization and abuse, and just sort of other things that, we don't want to avoid, but just have to kind of prepare ourselves to have that exposure to. There's definitely roughing it level conditions. So pit toilets, wildlife making their noises at night, insects. It's kind of, it's like camping in many respects. Probably a little bit nicer than just like tent camping if you were just to kind of go somewhere at a campsite, near campus or up the canyon from campus. But it's pit toilets. It's no kind of indoor plumbing types of things. And then just culturally, constant change, that orientations towards time and planning and all of that is different than sort of what those norms often are here. And so there's a lot of, hey, tomorrow's plan is changing. And then that next morning, like today's plan is also changing. So just knowing that change is inevitable, just culturally, that's sort of kind of pretty normal there. From a safety standpoint, just some things to highlight, and Derek can talk maybe about this if there's questions. But all of these trips, any international trip, is reviewed by and then approved by what's called the International Travel Oversight Committee, or ITOC, including this trip. So there's kind of a complete vetting of where's this trip going, what are the risks in those locations, and what have the trip organizers planned for kind of mitigating or kind of coexisting with those risks. I've been to this region somewhere around 40 times, so lots of relationships in place. Sarah, my co-instructor, has also been to the region several times as well, did her doctoral research in that area. So lots of prior experiences. We'll go through safety and health orientations. Prior to our departure, that'll be one of our pre-trip planning sessions. So that covers kind of immunizations, vaccinations, those types of things, as well, just to kind of how do we keep ourselves safe while we're traveling in Kenya. There is no unaccompanied free time for students outside of our immediate camp areas. So it's not that you have like, oh, we're going to go run into Archer's Post on our own, or we're going to go take the bus into Nanyuki on our own. Like there just isn't. It's just not a place where it's easy to know kind of how to do that, or kind of, you sort of have to know the cues of when if and or when you should, like, kind of raise your level of kind of radar of what's going on around me. So there's no unaccompanied free time for students. All the drivers and guides are trained and licensed. That's all taken very seriously by the government in Kenya when it comes to people leading groups around in vehicles. And then we have security at all of our accommodations, meaning we have human beings that is their job, is to provide security. Usually what that looks like is kind of people at the entrances to the places that we stay. And a lot of times those are sort of controlled entries, meaning that if a vehicle shows up, that individual is like, what's your business here? Are you staying here? And all that kind of stuff. So a couple other things here. Typical food: breakfast, eggs, fruit, bread, pancakes, cereals would all be kind of a typical thing that we might have for breakfast. Lunch, PB&J is always the safe backup. Avocado sandwiches, because avocados are abundant in Kenya. So it's basically just guacamole between some bread. It's delicious. Lots of fruit, rice, beans, and then dinners, pasta, vegetables, potatoes, rice. Lentils is a big source of protein for our group. You don't see any meat on this list. The main meat in Kenya is goat meat. So kind of right off the bat, not everyone's, they might be sort of willing to try it, but not necessarily going to make that part of our regular diet. But also on the places where we're staying, just from a food handling, food storage standpoint, while we could buy beef at a supermarket, it just can't, there just aren't ways for it to be stored safely. So it is a vegetarian diet for the most part, not because we're pushing any agenda on anyone, just out of the practicalities of what's the, from a food safety standpoint.
I do have a quick question about food.
Yeah.
Do you know, is it possible? I'm vegan and gluten-free.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. I have like the Happy Cow app, but yeah, that has nothing there.
Yeah.
So is there a way to accommodate that on this trip?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, there really isn't much dairy either beyond the eggs that you see on that list there, kind of for the same reasons that there's just not a safe way to sort of store dairy products. I'm trying to remember on this past trip if we had someone vegan or not, but without sort of trying to recall that exactly, I don't think that that's going to be a problem. I don't think that's going to be like a major thing to try to have to work around. It's tons of fruits and vegetables, in part because so much of that grows in Kenya. So it's a healthy diet overall. Fruits, vegetables, lentils. Yeah, it's so the only things that I think we regularly eat where you just wouldn't, would be like the pastas and the breads.
And then the eggs. Okay.
And the eggs, cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Just some characteristics for student success: adaptability, comfort living in the outdoors. I shouldn't even say comfort, but just sort of a willingness to live in the outdoors. Listening more than you're talking, a sense of adventure, having the humility to live by another culture's norms. I mentioned earlier, sort of the time orientation is so much different, so that if someone says they're going to meet to talk with us at 2:00 and they're not there, and 3:00 and they're not there, and they show up at 4, that's just normal. And so kind of having the humility to be like, oh, all right, that's just how it goes here. And there's really that self-awareness to recognize, what do I need, as well as what does the group need from me, so that I can be part of their success as well. Derek will get into the cost, but just to kind of let you know what that price covers. Well, Derek, do you want me to wait and have you cover that?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, sounds good. And then there's this past group at the top of a hike on a peak called Olokwe. All right, let me stop sharing. And let me ask if there's any questions programmatically about kind of a itinerary, day in the life, course content. And then after that, Derek will talk a little bit more about the logistics of cost and applications and things like that. And sorry about my slideshow snafu there. It's a sloppy copy and paste from another version of this presentation, and all the animation came over with it. Okay, I'm just doing a quick scroll through the grid, not seeing any hands up, not seeing anything in the chat. So Derek.
All righty, and please, if questions come up, feel free. I'll be pretty brief here, really just walking you through what's called the Maya Abroad portal. So this is that portal where we capture Student applications, if you haven't been on our websites, just a quick little overview. The Start Here section has a ton of good information. Financial aid and scholarships. So this is a 4-credit experience. Scholarships and financial aid are available. So tons of good info just in this kind of students section. To find the program itself, it would be, let's just look at Kenya, and then here we go. So this is an overview of a lot of what Brett just shared. Contact information for both professors. So if you do have any questions about kind of the day-to-day, certainly welcome to reach out directly. I will also put this information session posted here, so if you want to review it, that's how you can access it. Here are our travel dates. So just triple checking, Brett. So we are departing on the 13th of May and then arriving on the 14th. And then we'll have that 16 days in country and leaving on the 30th. So returning to Denver on the 31st. And this is a group flight. So everybody will be departing and returning to DIA together, just so we can kind of keep a eye on everybody as we arrive and depart. Dates are good, Brett?
Yeah, just to,
Yep.
but that is the Monday after the spring semester ends, just to give students a sense for where
Perfect.
that falls into the scheme of things of a spring semester schedule.
Academics, so as noted, 5 credits. Here's the course itself. Is through CSU Online, which means the tuition is a little bit less, which is always a wonderful thing. Some of the course objectives, a lot of what we just discussed. Life and country, also a lot of what we just discussed, but good reminders here. Application deadlines, and I skipped the budget just because I'll go into more detail there. Application deadlines. So we have an early application deadline of December 1st. Ideally, the program, what we call fills on December 1st. And we are looking for a minimum of approximately 10 students, hoping for 12. Remind me, Brett, max would be 16.
Yes, yeah, those are exactly. It's
Okay.
kind of when we go above 12, it's just better to get to 16 or 17 because we're talking about a third vehicle, and then to divide those fixed costs up by the best number. Yeah.
Okay. And we did it with, we had 10 students last year, right? Yep. Okay. So ideally, program fills by December 1st, and if not, we have until February 15th for that final deadline. We'll certainly be communicative about our progress and towards making that minimum enrollment. And we will be reviewing applications on or around December 1st. So you've already submitted your application. Wonderful, excited to see the enthusiasm. We'll be reviewing those applications again, starting December 1. So don't be disheartened if you're not hearing any updates from us. We just haven't started reviewing applications yet. Essential eligibility requirements. So this is something we've recently started adding to our website just to make sure everybody understands some of the just realities of these experiences. A lot of what was discussed in the slide deck is in here. So just thinking about, hey, I'm signing up for 5-hour drives in vehicles that are sometimes on rough roads. Is that something I'm comfortable with? So not trying to deter you by any means. We certainly want all students who have an interest in this type of experience joining, but we do want to be realistic about what the reality on the ground looks like, because it is going to be different than life here in Fort Collins. If you have any questions about these, of course, myself, the program leaders, happy to chat through what that would look like. All right, so cost. Here is what we call the budget sheet. A good portion of the experience is in that tuition, which again means this is a 4-credit experience. Please do speak to your academic advisor to talk about how this contributes to your graduation plan. 5 credits, which is exciting. The program charge is essentially on the ground costs. So the accommodation costs, the transportation costs, the vast majority of your expenses in country will in fact be covered by this. We'll talk a little bit, and I'll turn it over to Brett about personal expenses, but a good portion of the experience on the ground is covered by that program charge. The education abroad fee is $400. It's the fee that my office uses to operate all of these programs. $400 for a short-term program, $600 for a semester-length program. The tech fee is what students pay every semester to access all the tech systems here on campus that's just charged centrally. Insurance, all students will be enrolled in CSU's International Health Insurance Plan. This is a robust international health insurance. If you're needing to use insurance, that's what it's there for. There's no deductible, there's no copay. Everybody's on the same plan. We know how to use it. And it's just important just to have good international insurance when traveling. And then the airfare. So this is an estimated cost. I will say in the past, it's been quite lower than this. It's just hard to say. Flights fluctuates, and we want to estimate on the high end. Of course, if it is lower, that's what you will be charged, but it is a group flight, so we'll be purchasing the flight on your behalf. So this is what's called a billable subtotal. So that is what it will be billed via RamWeb over the summer term. There are some additional out-of-pocket expenses we want to make sure you're including in your budget. So if you do not have a passport, something that you would want to budget for and something you'd want to apply for sooner rather than later. There's a visa that you will need, and we'll walk you through that. Just doing some paperwork. It's not too laborious, but there's a cost associated with it. Books and supplies. Right, I don't know. Yeah, we just put it in there just in case. I don't know if you'll need it. Personal expenses. Do you want to talk about that? Additional meals, immunizations. I do want to acknowledge. So there are some costs with the immunizations that you'll be recommended to receive. So we want to make sure that's budgeted for. But kind of, yeah, additional meals, personal expenses.
Yeah. So it's not a lot, meaning like you see the billable total on that top part there, as far as like, what else might you spend while you're in Kenya. It's kind of, there's a couple categories there. One is a sort of, food while we're en route beyond what they feed you on the plane. So hanging out at airports, because we would have a layover in an airport on our way, right now, whether that's Paris or London or Amsterdam, who knows. So just kind of food while en route, and then just kind of like, filler food while we're in Kenya. So outside of the meals that are already provided, which is all the other meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner every day. Just if like, I'm gonna grab some snacks from a supermarket, so I have those throughout my trip, type of thing. But so there's those the food costs that I just described. And then really beyond that, it's really just kind of, things that you want to buy in Kenya to bring back for others, to bring back for yourself, to, kind of remember the trip by. And, you could spend $25 on that. You could spend hundreds of dollars on that. There's some really, really elaborate beadwork that is made in northern Kenya. So you could, buy yourself a $200 piece of beadwork that is just like incredible. So, but it's really not, I think if I think back on this past trip, I'm just recalling a student who, had to by necessity be pretty frugal with their out-of-pocket expenses while traveling, and it really wasn't a big deal at all. Like I didn't get the impression that they were like, oh, I wish I could get X. Like I think probably $150 or less would cover it, if not even a little bit less than that. But really not many out-of-pocket costs, not any necessary out-of-pocket costs once we land in Kenya.
Alrighty, so that was the primary content I wanted to share with you all. I guess one last thoughts. Again, just emphasizing that early application deadline is December 1st, and we won't be reviewing applications before then. As part of that application process, there's a brief essay just asking for a little bit of information about what is motivating you to apply, as well as just a couple little other application steps. It's pretty quick and easy. And of course, December 1st is a little bit away. So if you just want to like say hello at any time, just kind of a check-in, like, hey, how everything's going? Are you thinking this is going to come together? Like, you're always welcome to reach out to us. We certainly want to be transparent just so you can make your summer plans.
One thing I would add is I know for ESS and HDNR, this fits with those curricula. So depending on who your advisor is, Kay, Nikki, Paul, Jackie, they are one of our main ways of getting word out about this course. And so they're well aware of it. They know how to plug it into those curricula without it kind of being an add-on. So yeah, outside of those two majors, then it's you'd want to check with your advisor to kind of make sure that this is working, counting for something.
Perfect. And just out of that academic component, I'll kind of do a soft pitch for certainly I work in education abroad. I love education abroad. I think it's just one of the most valuable experiences a student can have during their time at college. But I think this program in particular is unique for a couple different reasons. First, it's an opportunity to get to a part of the world you may not get to otherwise, and kind of you don't want to just show up in Nairobi by yourself, right? This is an opportunity to do it as a group, to learn how to be a traveler in a part of the world that feels very different from home, with two, to be honest, experts who have done this for a long time. In doing these type of experiences, that's, again, if you arrange this independently, it would be quite a challenge. Doing those game drives, having these opportunities with just experienced academics. So a really unique opportunity to add that to your college degree and figure out if you want to do this for the rest of your life, right? I've had students who really determined like, hey, this is something I really am interested in, and students who've done these experiences and absolutely loved it, but decided, hey, you know what, this is not something I want to do forever. And I think both of those experiences can be really valuable, and that's why we're in college, is to learn about what we want to do after, right? All right. Questions, concerns, thoughts?
Quick question. So if the trip doesn't meet the minimum 10 people, it doesn't go. Is that right? Okay.
And we're confident, Claire. If we're getting close and after December 1, like we'll let you know, like, hey, like we're really close, or like, hey, this is not looking as optimistic, but we'll get 10.
Thank you.
I had a question kind of more about like, sorry, wow,
That's all right.
the like course content. Like I know that it's social and ecological, but would you say that there's like a balance to like more ecological or social, or is it pretty balanced?
Yeah, I think as far as like what we deliver from a content standpoint, I think it's pretty balanced, meaning it's probably close to 50% ecological content, 50% social. And then students, when we get down to Samburu, like, they group up groups of 2 or 3 to kind of co-design a research project with someone from the community, so they have their voice in it. And I can tell you that students generally gravitate more toward the social science on those projects. So I think you get more practice on the social science side because that's driven in part by just personal interest. And it ends up being a way to have more interaction with people in the community and all of that. So content delivery 50-50, application and practice, I think it veers definitely more toward the social science side. But that's, again, that could be in whichever direction your interest kind of take you while we're on the trip.
One more question. Do you have any like examples of what the research projects have looked like in the past? And
Yeah.
like how that has worked?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can speak to a couple of examples just from this past summer. I'll give you kind of an ecological example where we had 2 students who were kind of interested in rangeland conditions, so the health of the grass, in 3 different types of land management areas. So in a national reserve, which has kind of the most restrictive uses associated with it, meaning it's mostly managed for wildlife conservation. Then we had a community conservancy, which is kind of managed for both livestock and wildlife. And then you had just community land, which is kind of people can do whatever they want on community land. So kind of looking at how different is the rangelands in those 3 areas? Like, is it as different as we would intuitively think it might be? So that was one. On the social science side, we had 3 students do a project to understand kind of how young people, so kind of the equivalent of grades 6, 7, and 8. And at that age, most can speak English because they learn English as a required topic in school. So by the time you hit 6th grade, you've had 6 years of English. So they were kind of essentially measuring how did youth feel towards predator wildlife, leopards, lions, hyenas, wild dogs, given that those are sort of the culprits for human wildlife conflict. And then it was, okay, these are sort of the attitudes of youth toward these species they had a qualitative piece, was like understanding why, like why do you have these attitudes? And it's, you know, had its sort of roots in, some of them were directly affected by predator species, you know, predating on their families' livestock. Others maybe just kind of a little more following social norms if they didn't have the direct experience, any direct experience one way or another. So that was one. And then a second project was, you know, there's a lot of attention and a lot of need for elevating women's participation in conservation for it to be effective. But it's a little bit of like asking women to do one more thing in these areas where, you know, women are the key to so many needed outcomes. So their project was kind of focused on what are the opportunity costs. If you ask women to participate in these decision-making processes, at what cost is that to her? Like what something has to give, right? It's not going to be caregiving of their kids. So that was a little bit of what that project was about, was kind of understanding what are all of the demands what are all the demands on women in this region, so that it doesn't come across as just sort of tone deaf of like, we want your participation in decision making. Like, Diana, looks like you have a question.
I do. I have actually a couple. My first
Sure.
one is, what happens if a student gets really sick when you're out there? How close is the nearest medical care?
Yeah. So these are the types of questions that Derek's office requires the trip leaders to have thought out ahead of time, because the time to figure out what to do is not while a crisis is unfolding or while an issue is unfolding. So when we're in Laikipia in that region, because it's kind of more highly developed and kind of high level of education, there's actually one of the best there's good access to healthcare there. So where we stay in Laikipia, if we had to get to a clinic or a hospital, we're within about a 30 to 45-minute drive to decent healthcare. It's the same kind of clinics that expats who are living in Kenya go to. When we're up in Samburu, you know, we have access. There's clinics there as well, but they're much more limited as far as in their capacity of what they're equipped with and what they're kind of able to treat. So if it was something minor, right? So if I'm trying to think of something, cuts or scrapes or stitches or something like that, we can take care of that in Archer's Post. If it's something that requires a higher level of care, then we'd have to go up to Laikipia. That's about a 2-hour drive to get there. So access there just by geographically is further away.
Okay. And then I guess second is, I have a spouse who's very concerned about safety and doesn't even want to think about their child going to Africa, even though they're adults now. So it's, you know, their decision. But have you had any security incidents? What would you tell a parent who's just really closed
for
to
sure
that?
Yeah, you know, if you just were to do your Googling, you'd be like, oh, no, no one's going to Kenya in this family. It is, you know, and I understand that. And if you were to look at the US State Department warning for Kenya, you know, it's kind of treating that at a scale of the country. And there's some troubling language in that warning. What I would say, you know, we take students to Kenya. The university is okay with it. Number one, this is a highly, highly structured trip. Like the risks to travelers in Kenya rarely occur in this type of context where you have a highly structured kind of, we know exactly from the time we land in Nairobi who's picking us up and how we are moving around and where we are staying. And there's just no opportunities for students to go have time on their own to make an unintentionally poor decision, type of thing. So that'd be my first sort of reaction is, yeah, I get it. There's risks in Kenya and those stories are around, but this is such a highly structured experience that there's just not really much opportunity for those risks to actually show themselves with this group. And the other thing I would say, you know, there are definitely pockets where the risk is higher in Kenya. We're not going to those areas. We're not going to the far north of the country. We're not going to the poorest parts of Nairobi. it's kind of, to me, I guess there's, we all know there's a variety of socioeconomics in any given place that come with different levels of risk, and we're not going to those places. That said, we're going to be exposed to plenty of high levels of poverty, but I care when I think about like, oh, what are the biggest risks to our group? It's more kind of like foodborne stuff. Is someone going to get a food related thing that kind of has to run its course for 24 hours, sort of deal. But we have not had, between this course as well as a trip I used to lead that was over the winter break, and it wasn't for credit, it was just more for cross-cultural immersion. We haven't had any instances where a student was a victim of some sort of violent crime, or even just kind of property crime of robbery and things like that. The things that we've dealt with are like, oh, somebody's sick and we got to make sure we carry a first aid kit full of stuff. So.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And I understand I understand the perspective that you have as a parent for sure. And we have, I want to say dealt with, that makes it sound bad, but we sort of had to kind of talk students through how to talk to your parents about this, if this is something you really want to do. I'd add on top of that, no alcohol is a sort of a blanket policy. Like, there will be no drinking on this trip, in part because I don't want to deal with anything related to drinking. But we're also going to, especially in the Samburu part of Kenya, we're going to an area where substance abuse has just wreaked havoc on a community, and it's not where there's not sort of the social norm of like people having a beer or a drink. It's alcohol is used much more in an abusive type of where people abuse alcohol who use alcohol, and so we're not gonna drink because that's just not gonna be appropriate for where we're going. But if that helps in making the case to anybody, no free time, no alcohol. But I promise the trip is fun.
I want to know how I can sign up.
I mean, I recognize, just for students and parents, I recognize that the price tag is what the price tag is. I would say that for 5 credits and 16 days in Kenya, it's a good value. But I recognize that it is a price tag that is not small.
All right, we are at 6 o'clock. We'll certainly hang out if you have someone you want to just kind of chat with directly, but do not feel obligated to hang on unless you want to. So thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And I would just encourage you, if you haven't already, to start an application just so we know there's some interest, and then we can better communicate with you about scholarships and kind of keeping you up on what's going on. So start an application. I know some people signed off. If you know any of them, let them know. Just again, start an application. There's no obligation, right? It'll just be better for us to help kind of gauge interest.
Yep, it's super helpful to us to kind of know where things are at. And then we know to keep communicating with you if we see you've started an application. Like, hey, are you still interested? We're kind of filling up, sort of thing. So it's definitely helpful just to get that. It doesn't bind you to anything. If you start an application, you're not forced to go on the trip.
All right, we'll hang out. Thank you all for your time, though.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You bet.